Good evening, Grand Rapids. Good evening, Grand Rapids. How's everybody doing? Let's give a round of applause for the Grand Rapids Community College Diversity Learning Center again for such an incredible lecture series, and to the Board of Trustees and the leadership at this great institution. Good evening. On behalf of Blue Cross and Blue Shield of West Michigan, one of the sponsors of this annual diversity lecture series, and as a current president of the Grand Rapids branch of the NAACP, I'm honored to introduce my brother, Mr. Benjamin Jealous. Benjamin Jealous, and I have to add this, you know, it's almost like this script is probably going to be longer than his presentation. So Benjamin Jealous is a partner at Kapoor Capital, where he invests in high-growth companies that have a positive social impact. He formerly served as the youngest ever president and CEO of the National NAACP. Jealous has been a leader of successful state and local movements to ban the death penalty, outlaw racial profiling, defend voting rights, secure marriage equality, and free multiple wrongfully incarcerated people. Under his leadership, the NAACP grew to be the largest civil rights organization online and on mobile, experienced its first multi-year membership growth in 20 years, and became the largest community-based nonpartisan voter registration operation in the country. A builder of robust coalitions, Jealous's leadership at the NAACP included bringing environmentalist organizations into the fight to protect voting rights and convincing well-known conservatives to join the NAACP in challenging mass incarceration. Prior to leading the NAACP, he spent 15 years serving as a journalist and community organizer. While at Mississippi's Jackson Advocate newspaper, his investigations were credited with exposing corruption at a state penitentiary and proving the innocence of a black farmer who was being framed for arson. While at Amnesty International, he led successfully efforts to outlaw prison rape, expose the increasing trend of children being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and drawing attention to expanded racial profiling in the wake of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. Jealous has been named to the 40 under 40 lists of both Fortune and Time magazines. He is the #1 on the Root.com 2013 list of Black leaders under 45. Please join me and let's receive our brother, my brother, with a welcome round of applause. If you could stand to your feet and let's receive Mr. Benjamin Jealous.
Well, good evening. It's great to be here in Grand Rapids. Thank you. Thank you, Clee Jackson. Let's give a round of applause to our local president of the NAACP, his team. Thank you, Chris Arnold. You know, I won't forget Chris's name. When you have a last name like Jealous, you kind of take note of names. And earlier today, I forgot Chris's last name, and somebody said to me, "Don't forget, she has 2 men's names." I was like, "Oh, right, perfect." Chris Arnold. And thank you to the student at Grand Rapids when I was making, Grand Valley, when I was making notes. Our treasurer of our local NAACP gave me her notebook, so please don't forget to get this back. Yo, look, I'm here to talk about mass incarceration, and I'm here to talk about it with hope. And tonight I'm going to tell some stories, and some moments you're going to feel like you're on a journey with me, and just roll with me on this journey. I want to talk about how we win. It's a big problem. And it's a problem much bigger than we realize, and sometimes it sneaks up on you. I remember one moment it snuck up on me. I was on a flight on Delta Airlines from Atlanta to Memphis. And I was flying so much as president of the NAACP that I was always getting bumped up to first class. And it was like 11 o'clock in the morning. But you know it's first class, so they feel obligated to ask you if you want to drink, even though it's 11 o'clock in the morning. And so I said, no, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. And then this guy sat down next to me in a University of Mississippi in an Ole Miss booster shirt. And I still resisted the urge to drink. And then he said to me, you know, hi, I'm Bill. I said, hi, I'm Ben. He said, you know, whatever. He was working for a big corporation, maybe FedEx, one of the big ones in Memphis. And he said, you know, how do you da-da-da? He said, what do you do? I said, oh, I'm the president of the NAACP. He said, there's University of Mississippi shirt. School has the Confederate flag as their mascot till like 2 years ago. It's their mascot. Okay. And only school in America has a flag as a mascot. Okay. And he, I mean, like even West Point doesn't have a flag as a mascot, but okay. And so, you know, he kind of looks at me, he says, so, tell me about affirmative action. I was like, I'll take that drink. So, I'm sitting there talking to this older white man in a University of Mississippi shirt about affirmative action. And I said, big guy, and I said, well, affirmative action, sir, is supposed to be the hammer that destroys nepotism as the operating system of our country. He said, I could sign up for that, but tell me about what does that do for my family? I said, well, I suspect the women in your family are pretty pleased how things have turned out over the last 50 years as far as opportunity, college, employment, leadership ranks of corporations. He said, yeah, that's great, man. He said, look, we've never been concerned about the women in my family. I'm talking about the boys in my family. He said, my family, he said, how can I put this? We came over here. So the reason I'm flying from Atlanta to Memphis is, you know, I work in Memphis because I went to Ole Miss, and I wear this shirt because I'm a bit of an exception in my family. I come from a very poor family, and I got a football scholarship, and well, the coach got me a job in Memphis, and that's why my life has been so good. But the boys in my family, well, we came over here originally as prisoners in the Georgia penal colony. And well, the boys in my family, the men in my family, most of us, we've been in and out of prison ever since. What will it do for them? And we talked about sort of geographic-based affirmative action and how if you're in Appalachia or poor parts of Georgia, you know, Harvard will give you, you know, special consideration and so forth. But then we just ended up talking about our shared passion to end mass incarceration. Now, I want to define the problem for a second because I think we think of it sort of like something that affects black people, and we miss the point. America doesn't just have the most incarcerated black or brown people on the planet. We have the most incarcerated white people on the planet, too. There are roughly 1 million blacks in prison and roughly 1 million whites in prison. And you might say, well, yeah, but the black population is much smaller. It's true, the rate is much higher, but understand it in these terms. A black man in America today is more than 3 times as likely to be incarcerated as a black man was, statistically, in South Africa at the height of apartheid when South Africa was the world's leading incarcerator. A white man in America today is almost as likely as the average black man in South Africa at the height of apartheid when South Africa was the world's leading incarcerator to be behind bars in our country. So as I said to my father, who's white and who, like Bernie Sanders, was in the Congress of Racial Equality and goes way back as a fighter for racial justice, said to my dad, I said, Dad, look, man, and mind you, my father's family's been white in America since 1624. So they're like really white. And I said to my dad, I said, Dad, you know, if what white privilege in America gets you in the 21st century is like a 20 to 25% discount on the incarceration rate of black men in South Africa at the height of apartheid, like we're all in the frying pan, Dad. The only question is like, are you on the edge of the frying pan or in the middle of the frying pan? But we're all in the frying pan. the consequence of us incarcerating, and what's happened to white men in particular, and white people, and more generally over the last 10 years, well, the 10 years specifically of 2000 to 2010, because we get a lot of these stats with censuses. So what we learned with the last census was it went from about half as likely as the black man in South Africa to 3/4 as likely, and was trending up. And that's why I'd say it's 20 to 25, it might even be closer. We won't know till the next census. Is because we took the tactics of the war on crack, and we applied it to the war on meth, and we left the incentives in place that were the same. You see, in order for a local police department to get federal subsidy for the war on drugs, you have to prove two things by one action. The two things are an existing problem and ongoing progress towards solving that problem, and you measure that in arrests. It's like as misguided as using body counts to measure whether we were winning the war in Vietnam. And so what happens with a drug like crack, where most crack users, the biggest cohort, has always been middle-aged, middle-class white men, typically in the suburbs. The problem is, if you want to find them, they're in their living room, and you can drive down their street all day and you'll never see them smoking crack. So if you want to find a lot of crackheads quickly, then you go into a poor neighborhood, typically a poor black neighborhood, where there are tenements and people are in small apartments, and crack has an acidic smell, and they smoke with the windows open or they smoke on the stoop, and you round them up. And the law we were dealing with most of the time, which still exists in some states, has gone down to 18 to 1 in the federal government, and yet gone down to 1 to 1. It's been eliminated in South Carolina, so it shows some of what we're dealing with. I'll get to that in a second. Literally said, if you had this much crack, like this much, like my thumb, 2 rocks of crack, 5 milligrams, you would get as much punishment if you had half a kilo of powder. So we took that approach and we applied it to the war on meth, and we started literally going to trailer parks and poor white neighborhoods to round people up, like we had done in tenements with black folks in the war on crack. And so black drug arrests started to come down as our communities protested and shifted, and the white arrests have gone like this. The problem with that, of course, is when you take a strategy for mass incarceration of 12% of your population, black people, and you apply it to 60% of your population, white people, the ability for exponential growth as far as number of people behind bars and expense is significant. Now, why should we care? Family doesn't live in a tenement, family doesn't live in a trailer park. Maybe you don't know anybody who's ever been caught up in these dragnets. Because we all pay, and we pay explicitly. When I was president of the NAACP, and admittedly before the famous Joe Paterno scandal with the football team at Penn State, I sat down with the then president of Penn State, and I said, it's the Pennsylvania State University, and I said, Mr. President, we're backstage, University of Pittsburgh, having a conversation. I said, Mr. President, just curious, what's your biggest leadership challenge? He said, man, it's the same every year. It's like Groundhog Day. Man, I go up to the state capitol and I try to keep them from sending so much more money to the state pen. So much more money to the state pen, so they will just send a little more to Penn State. Coming out of that conversation and a parallel experience with protesting at the University of California over tuition hikes in response to state budget cuts driven by mass incarceration and the whole Books Not Bars campaign that Van Jones's old organization, the Ella Baker Center, was behind, we at the NAACP commissioned a study. It's called Misplaced Priorities. We looked at states across the country over the last 40 years, and what you saw was that what had happened in California and Pennsylvania, if you will, bookends of the nation, had happened everywhere in between. California, the state budget, in approximately 1973, the year I was born, when you're the CEO of an organization, you can be vain like that, about 11%, but there was a reason, which I knew as a child, California's public universities were considered to be among the best in the world. So I wanted to go back then. Back then, 11% of the state budget went to public universities. They were almost free. 3% went to prisons. Fast forward by 5-6 years ago, say roughly 2010, 2011, 11% of the state budget was now going to prisons. 6.5-7% were going to public universities. The following year, Governor Jerry Brown of California, I'll get back to him later as well, had proposed 6% for public universities and 15% for prisons. What do we learn from that? We learned two things, but then we come to a big conclusion I'll get to in a second. One is that we love our kids a lot because our kids are always the ones who are headed to college, right? Our kids, the ones you disown are headed to prison, but the ones you claim, man, they're headed to college. And our kids, we have never let the percentage of the state budget to send our kids to public universities get as low, and that includes community colleges, the whole range, get as low as we had allowed our prison budgets to get. So it never got to 3%. On the other hand, the prison budget had switched places with the old college budget. It was now up at 11%, which shows that there is something that will trump our love of our children. It's our fear of somebody else's kids. And we'll spend if Jerry Brown had his way that year, 2.5 times as much, paying for our fear of somebody else's children as we will to fund our own children to go to school. And if you look at the failure of empires, and ours is one of those, if you look at the failure of empires, there are two things that can destabilize an empire financially, historically. Russia, for instance, got tangled in both. Rome got tangled in both. The overinvestment in endless wars overseas and overinvestment in over-incarceration at home. The two previous countries to hold our place now in the world as leading incarcerator no longer exist. One is the former Republic of South Africa, which had an internal revolution, and the other is the former Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which imploded. It is unsustainable what we are doing, and that's why this issue is so urgent. But let me take you back for a bit to how this all began for me and how I've learned over the years the strategies that I believe are going to fuel us to win. I was a college student. It was a friend's 21st birthday. We were drinking. I will neither admit nor deny whether I was 21 at the time. And a round of toasts went up to my boy for turning 21. And then another toast went up, and before that toast reached my friend's shoulder, he was overcome with grief, and he began pouring libations of memory for all of our friends who had been shot and killed, the wars on our streets, or sent to prison, the war on drugs. Trying to turn the mood around, another friend threw his glass up and toasted the fact that one more brother had survived to 21. That one more young man of color in America, one more young black man had survived to 21. The motion cut me like a knife. The notion that somebody thought it was an accomplishment for a member of any group in this, the world's wealthiest and greatest democracy, let alone for their own group, let alone for my group, to merely breathe past their 21st birthday cut me like a knife, sent me reeling, made me sleepless, and I ultimately did what I'm still blessed to be able to do. You see, my grandma today, she's 99 years old. She's the granddaughter of slaves. She carries with her, she's the griot of our family. She carries with her 200 years of American history experienced firsthand. The 100 handed down to her by her grandparents and great-grandparents who have been slaves, and the 100 or so she has witnessed. Much of it triumphant, But honestly, she could do without the sad turn of the last 5 to 40 years, whether you're talking about the attacks on voting rights or mass incarceration. And I said, Grandma, what happened? Grandma, you said that we were supposed to be the children of the dream, the ones born after Dr. King's March on Washington and his I Have a Dream speech and the passage of the Civil Rights Acts and the slaying of Jim Crow. That you had slain, that you and your generation and my mom's generation had slain Jim Crow, the great dragon holding our people in the ghettos away from opportunity, the way that your grandparents and great-grandparents had conspired to end slavery. And that all we had to do was reap what you all had sown. He said, all we had to do, Grandma, was just keep our nose clean and walk a straight line and study hard, and everything would be okay. And Grandma, I dare say, Grandma, it worked for many of us. I'm grateful to you, Grandma, but I don't think it worked for most of us, because my generation, these so-called children of the dream, well, we've come of age just in time to find ourselves the most murdered in the country and the most incarcerated on the planet. What happened, Grandma? And my grandmother looked down, and then she looked up, and she said, grandson, it's sad, but it's simple. We got what we fought for, but we lost what we had. We got the right to send we got the right to send our kids to any school we wanted to. We lost the right to assume that they would be loved and welcomed the way that this is my grandmother talking, that I had been welcomed at that one-room schoolhouse my dad built at the end of slavery for his children and the other children of free slaves in our community. Or the way that your mom was welcomed at that little Jim Crow public elementary school down the street from the housing project she was raised in. We got the right to be police officers or in law enforcement like your grandfather, but we lost the right to live in safe communities. We got the right to buy a house in any part of town. Our people, at the same time, lost land down south at the rate of 500 to 1,000 acres per day, every year, every decade, from the start of World War II until the end of the Cold War. We got the right to be free. And yet the one loophole in the Constitution that allows them to send you back into slavery is being duly convicted under the law. And man, have we been mass incarcerated. And my grandmother's short telling of sort of 200 years of the American struggle, and I would offer it isn't an American struggle, it isn't a black struggle, it's not a civil rights struggle. Read the preamble to our Declaration of Independence. This is our struggle, all of ours. And understand what's going on with mass incarceration right now. Nobody gets a free pass. The only question is, are you the canary or the miner? Do you die sooner or later? In that short telling, her admonition was pretty clear. It's not enough at any point to know simply what you are fighting for. You must also know what has already been gained for you, or you might find yourself, as many of us did in 2012 in many states, fighting to re-elect the nation's first black president while they were stealing our neighbors' voting rights. But in the pauses, in the glances, and in that regal arc to her back, a true Virginia lady, despite all she had endured, my grandmother made a more damning indictment. By the way, I heard y'all's pastor say damn downstairs tonight, so apparently you can say that in this pulpit. He's a good man. And, a more damning indictment, which was that she didn't believe that my generation had figured out either, that we either had adequate stock of what had been gained for us, and that we didn't understand the price of anything that had been gained for us, nor did she think we had figured out what we were fighting for. And so I left that day, and I got on a bus. She was living at Exit 0 on the Garden State Parkway, New Jersey, in a little historically black vacation and retirement community called Westgate, Maine. I was going to school in New York City. It's a long bus ride home, lots of stops. And I took out a notebook like this one I stole from the Grand Valley student, the treasurer of the local NAACP, and I just started writing down all of the things that really ticked me off, because I decided that before I got off that bus, I would figure out what I was fighting for. And as I would write something on the page that was clearly more significant than something else I had on the page, I'd cross off the thing that was less significant. I just kept writing and crossing off and writing and crossing off and writing and crossing off. And all of a sudden, I was 15 minutes from Port Authority in New York City, and I realized I better just pick something, because I committed myself to pick one thing to fight for before I was off that bus, because I just couldn't take it anymore. I looked at the history of my family on both sides, on the white side going all the way back to the American Revolution and through the suffragettes and on to the civil rights movement, and on the black side going back to black abolitionists coming up through the civil rights movement. And it was pretty clear that for most generations on the white side and for every generation on the black side, we knew what we were fighting for. And my generation had been told fighting was optional. You know, it wasn't turning out the way it was supposed to. And so I wrote it, and then I realized there's 15 minutes left, and there's 6 things on the page, and I'm classic sort of ADHD, like Generation Xer. And so I was like, indecisive. And I just flipped over that sheet of paper, and I wrote down those 6 things, and I closed my eyes, and I heard that voice from my grandfather that always used to say, "Son, never let the perfect get in the way of the good." I decided everything on that page was, good enough to fight for, and so I flipped it over and I wrote it down, that circle. I drew that circle, and I said, whatever is most in the center of the circle when I open my page, that is what I will fight for. And I opened my eyes, and it said, "End the injustice in the justice system." I had no earthly idea how to do that. I was like, wow, I really wrote that down? How am I going to do that? But it occurred to me that it worked pretty well in the negative, that I knew what I didn't have to fight for, that I knew the coalition meeting I didn't have to go to, the class I didn't have to take, the speaker I didn't have to listen to. And then I did something that I'd seen my mom do, but I'm a guy, so I wasn't going to tape it on my mirror like she and Oprah were doing that year, my affirmations or whatever, my goals. I tore it out and I taped it at the bottom of my underwear drawer so nobody else would see it. And every day I would open up my underwear drawer, and there would say, "End injustice in the justice system." And I'd recommit myself every morning to pursuing that goal. And it was easy because I was living in Harlem and going to Columbia University, and the contrast was incredible. And seeing kids getting away on campus with dealing drugs by the boatload, and mothers getting rounded up in Harlem for being addicts, and kids getting sent off to foster care. And a funny thing happens. When you really commit yourself to winning a battle before you die, a little light goes off inside of you. It's what we sing about in the civil rights movement when we sing that song, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine." But at first, it's not really shining for anybody to see. It's just glowing enough that it keeps you warm in the cold moments of self-doubt. And it shines just bright enough to show you the next step in front of you. And so I just kept taking the next step, and taking the next step, and taking the next step. And the next thing I knew, I was in Jackson, Mississippi, fighting a governor who was fixing to turn a black college into a prison. If you're a football fan, take Jerry Rice's alma mater, Mississippi Valley State University, and turn it into a prison. While he took the other 2 public historically black colleges in the state, Alcorn University, where the great black quarterback Steve McNair went, and shut it down completely. And he intended to take Jackson State University, Walter Payton's alma mater, and make it majority white in 2 years without any compensatory increase in spaces for black students at the historically white colleges in Mississippi. I said to the lawyer who had invited me down there, what exactly is my job description? He said, I'm just going to write it down on a napkin here. I don't want anybody to hear me say this. I said, all right. Passes the napkin across the table. First line, put the fear of God in the judge. Second line, put the fear of God in the governor. I look at him, he says, son, this is Mississippi. Judges down here don't do the right thing because it's the right thing. They do the right thing because they're real afraid of doing the wrong thing. You got to make them afraid to do the wrong thing. I said, sir, how do I do that? He said, you know those really big street protests you've been organizing in New York City? I said, yes, sir. All you got to do is organize those down here in Jackson, Mississippi. I said, respectfully, sir, aren't the stakes a bit higher here in Jackson, Mississippi? Like, a lot higher? He said, well, son, aren't you in the Ivy League? Man, we thought you were smart enough to figure out that one before you got off the bus. I said, well, I guess I got a job to do. He said, yeah, son, I suppose you do. So I went to work organizing what would be the largest student protest in Mississippi since the students were shot and killed during a student protest by the National Guard in the same year the students were shot and killed at Kent State, in the early 70s, I guess it was. And specifically, we wanted about 15,000 students to fill up the square in front of the state capitol and push towards the governor's mansion and make it very clear that this was outrageous. And then we decided that the notion of turning a college into a prison, think school to prison pipeline, no pipeline, just school to prison. Sisters, you should leave. Brothers, you can stay. Don't mind the fence and the barbed wire. That turning a college into a prison wasn't simply anti the interests of the black community of Mississippi or the black community of America or the civil rights movement itself. No, it was un-American. One thing we don't do in America, even in Mississippi, is turn a college into a prison. And so we decided we needed at least 5% white participation so that the photos would look somewhat integrated. It wouldn't just look like a black thing, it would look like a Mississippi thing. Which meant we were looking for 750 white liberals in Mississippi on short notice. Now, we knew some, and so we made a list, and we got to 7. And then somebody said, well, you know, I'm looking at this list and I realize that there are 2 professors with ponytails at Millsaps College who are not on the list. Millsaps is known as the Harvard of Mississippi. It's a great white liberal private college in Mississippi. Liberal is relative in Mississippi. So now we had 9. We put down the 2 professors with ponytails. That got us to 9. Now in the corner was a guy who didn't quite think like the rest of us. He was, kind of a little bit to himself. He was brilliant, and he was socially awkward. And he was going through a calendar back and forth like this the whole time while I'm trying to get a list moving towards 11 white liberals in Mississippi. And he just yells, Ben, Ben, Ben. I'm finally saying, yeah, man, what is up? And he said, Earth Day is coming up. And we all took a deep breath and began to smile. Because Earth Day in the Deep South is like Groundhog Day for white liberals. It's the day they come out of their cave. The rest of the year they live in a world of like Brooks Brother and Talbot's homogeneity. It's all cotton dresses and blue blazers. You can't tell them apart from the most conservative members of the GOP. But on Earth Day, man, it's tie-dyes and Birkenstocks. And you can see them a mile away. And they gather like in 1 of 10 places, typically at the historically white universities in Mississippi. And so we split up teams and we sent them to the historically white universities. And it might be an awkward phrase to you, but that's the reality of segregation. Yes, we have HBCUs. You hear about them all the time, historically black colleges and universities. And we have historically white universities. Some places we just call that Harvard. And so, sorry, my dad's family helped found Harvard in 1636. It's a family joke. So, we fan out. I'm the lead organizer, which means I get to sit at my desk all day. Everybody's out giving speeches, but this is before cell phones were either safe or affordable. You know, they were like this big. They were very expensive, and you were fairly certain that they would cause cancer as quickly as that microwave oven that your friend's mom bought like 3 years too soon. And so we weren't buying them for a whole bunch of reasons. So I sat there at my phone all day, and by 3 o'clock, it seemed like things had gone pretty well. All the teams except one had checked back in and say that the rallies were great, they got lots of signups, they were well received, everybody's on board, we're moving towards our number, leaps and bounds, thanks to the brother with the calendar in the corner, except for one. By 5, the teams are gathered at the office. One team hasn't checked in. 7, the same team hasn't checked in. 10, I send everybody home. I say, look, when they call, I'll call you. Maybe they're out drinking, I don't know. But really, we were worried. Because we had sent them up a narrow highway that's framed on either side by bogs, the exact same bogs around Philadelphia, Mississippi, where they found the bodies of all those other black men before they found the bodies of Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, the 3 civil rights workers in 1964. If your car goes off at the right point in the right way, it just disappears, and we'll never find you. And then you hang a left, and you go 40 miles deeper into the piney woods to Starksville, Mississippi, Mississippi State University. Any Johnny Cash fans here? Keep your hand raised if you remember the song Starksville City Jail. Wow, that's like the first person who's remembered that over there in like several speeches. Starksville City Jail is a song by Johnny Cash about the day he was arrested in Starksville, Mississippi for picking a daisy. Now you might imagine politics of the late 1960s being what they were. If you had arrested the man who was second only to Elvis in the entire state of Mississippi for picking a daisy, you would be instantly famous. And that's what had happened to a certain sheriff's deputy named Dolph Bryant. And a couple of years later, he became sheriff, and he had been sheriff ever since. I would once see him on Entertainment Tonight giving a check to Roseanne Cash, giving her like the $25 that Johnny had paid to get out of jail. And I noted he didn't pay her any interest. That was Dolph Bryant. 30 years, no interest. Which is to simply say that if you were to say to put an adjective in front of SOB with him, you would just be gilding the lily. He was merely the toughest SOB you had ever met. And we were worried that our folks hadn't returned from his town. At the time, there was a rash of jailhouse hangings. They literally had created a theory, as spurious as it was, called sudden incarcerated death syndrome, which said there are some people who are so freedom-loving, that was code for the young black men who were being found hung in these jails, that even though they're like headed to the prom or on their way to Harvard University, when they get inside of a jail, they hang themselves in a matter of hours by themselves. So we had reason to be worried. On top of that, the week before, the Ku Klux Klan had put out a press release. Who knew? Saying that they were going to kill one of the leaders of our march in retaliation if Byron Dale Beckwith, the man who had assassinated Medgar Evers, who was on trial that year, 30 years too late for assassinating Medgar Evers, if Byron Dale Beckwith was convicted. And they were calling every night to threaten us. And so I was waiting there by the phone, and the phone rang around 1 a.m., and I feared it was the Klan again, and I picked it up anyways, and I said, hello? And I heard the voice I had been waiting for. It was my lead organizer I'd sent up to Mississippi State University in Starksville. And he said, Ben? I said, yeah. He said, we had a problem up at State. and we don't know what to do, and we need you to get down here to the Waffle House at the corner of I-55 and I-20 so we can figure it out. You can tell by my size. I can make it to Waffle House in 5 minutes flat in any city in America that has one. And so I was there in a matter of moments, and I slide into the booth, and I said, fellas, what happened? And they said, well, we did what you said, and we got there early, and we asked to speak, and we asked to speak at the end of the program, and they said, fine. That's supposed to be around 2 o'clock. The crowd should be at its biggest, and we said, great. 2 o'clock came, and the program was still going. They hadn't called us. All right. 2:30, we noticed they're breaking down the microphones and moving on the band, and we said, wait, we're supposed to. And they said, no, y'all. We said the end of everything. Y'all can speak after the party that's coming up next. Well, the environmentalist gathering turned into a frat boy party, and at 11 p.m. at night, Ben, after the third encore of Sweet Home Alabama, they invited us on stage to speak, and we said, we need your help to save the black colleges. And while a whole group of drunk frat boys started chanting, get a rope, get a rope, get a rope. And well, Ben, we did that crazy little Mississippi two-step, the one where you walk as fast as you possibly can just to get the heck out of there, and yet slow enough that your knees don't buckle, so they don't think you're running and they don't chase you. And then we drove just as fast as we could to get out of here, but yet slow enough that we didn't attract the attention of Sheriff Bryant's deputies. And well, now we're here and we don't know what to do. And at that moment, a cold wind hit the back of all of our necks, and we started looking around like this. And we realized that despite the fact that this particular Waffle House was between a black college and 2 white colleges and typically had a mix of students in it, we were the only black people in the place. There wasn't even a black dishwasher. And on top of that, there was an old guy, still fairly fit, but an old guy, white feathered hair, long white shirt hanging 9 inches below his waistband, staring at us and not smiling. Pay some money, look over his shoulder, talk to the lady, look over his shoulder, kept staring at us. And that 9 inches was significant because in Mississippi for $100 back then and no felonies, you could get a license to carry and carry a concealed firearm wherever you wanted to go. And he walks over to us with to-go bags. I've established Waffle House exists for obesity. Back then, they were just full-on paper grocery sacks. And he says, y'all the boys I've been seeing on television? Now, I'm from Northern California. One of my boys is from Chicago. One of the other organizers, he's from St. Louis. The third is from New Orleans. We call each other boys. But we were not accustomed to answering when an old white man in Mississippi called us boy. And yet, I've been getting death threats all week on the phone. They just got threatened with lynching to their face. It's like going on 2 a.m. We're the only black folks in the restaurant, so we give the only logical response. Yes, sir. Says, hold on a second. Turns around real slowly to put down these gargantuan bags of all sorts of obesity-ness on the table. And right then, my guys, 2 of them are football players, and kind of go like this on the table. So I turn around and I look, and they, with their eyes, direct me to the fact that we can no longer see his dominant hand, and they mouth, let us take care of him. And I said, and they gave me this look like, respectfully, you're from California by way of New York City. Let us take care of him. And so seizing the last bit of positional power I had, I slapped my hand on the table and I said, fellas, let's just hear what the man has to say. And they gave me this look like, if he shoots us and he doesn't get to you, our moms are coming for you next. And he's turning around and we're all like in slow motion watching his hand, and he says, and I'm just going to use the words because it's what he said. Well, I'm so proud of you boys. Man, if I'd been born a nigger in this crazy state, I'd be mad as heck too. Okay, he didn't say heck. This man has called us boy twice. He's called us nigger once. And yet our heart's beating a little faster. We're flushed, and we think we might be in love. Because apparently he's taken a moment just to think about what it must be like to be black in Mississippi when they're fixing to turn your college into a prison. I'm so proud of you boys. If you need anything, if you need money, if you need somebody for that crazy march of yours, if you need a car, you come see me. I own the used car lot right down Highway 49. That night, we slept a little easier. The next morning, we woke up. We did what good organizers do. We debriefed the day before. We talked about the lessons learned. And we decided that we had made one mistake that day. That we had assumed. We assumed that we knew who our friends absolutely were and who they absolutely were not. They absolutely were anybody at an Earth Day rally. Turned out to be about 90% right. It was that last one where they tried to lynch us that almost got us. Or at least they chanted about it. And we had assumed that we knew who our friends absolutely weren't, and we were 100% wrong. We would not be the old white dude at Waffle House at 2 o'clock in the morning staring at us and not smiling and calling us boy on top of that. And so we figured we'd do two things. One was they were absolutely going to get down to his used car lot and get his money and tell him how to get to the march, because I wasn't taking our count on white liberals for granted, and I was making $85 a week and I intended to get paid. And secondly, from that day forward, we would talk to anybody and everybody who would listen to us as if we knew they were inclined to be our ally from the beginning, with the optimism and the conviction that we spoke to a black church, we would speak to a white church. That we spoke to a Democrat, we would speak to a Republican. Because this just wasn't anti-black or anti-civil rights or the ideas of a wayward Republican. This was un-American. Those schools are still open to this day, and that prison was never built. If I had more time, I would tell you another story about a group of young people, a young organizer. I'll just summarize it, and I want to get into the lessons learned, and we can get into some questions. Young organizing, in this country until, I don't know, somewhere in the last decade, we still permitted ourselves to execute children, to sentence children to death row. They would be adults by the time that we executed them because our legal process is complex. But the day they got their death sentence, it would be for a crime that they could be as young as 16 years old. In some instances, 14. You go back far enough to when the protests first started, literally you can find them executing girls during the Salem witch trials. And there was a young lady named Joteka Edie who at age 16 decided to form a coalition against this in Johnsonville, South Carolina, literally made up of the NAACP chapter, which is almost all black, and the pro-life club that was almost all white. And conservative as the NAACP was liberal. And using that strategy at a moment when the American anti-death penalty movement was about to lose and miss our window to abolish the juvenile death penalty. When we had taken a list of 20 states where we thought we could change laws and lost battles in 17, and we had to get 3 more states. Because you see, in America, to outlaw punishment, it cannot be just cruel or unusual, as it is in England. You see, in America, Harvard wasn't once, I'm just ripping on Harvard tonight, but Harvard wasn't once what it is now. It was just a little school in Salem, and apparently they didn't train people as good as they do now, and so some Harvard grad, I guarantee you, was the one who, when drafting the Bill of Rights, substituted the word "and" for the word "or." British common law, cruel or unusual punishments are outlawed. In America, if torture is popular, it's constitutional because our standard is and. It must be cruel and unusual. Cruel had already been established in the case of the juvenile death penalty. A few years earlier, the Supreme Court had outlawed the death penalty, the group they backwardly refer to as the mentally retarded, when they could just say people with very low IQs. Because they said, A, it was cruel because it was like executing a child, so they had established executing children was cruel. But they said, B, it was unusual because a majority of states now oppose the practice. We had 23 states opposing the practice of sentencing juveniles to death. We had to get it to 26. We had targeted 20 states. We'd lost in 17. And then we sent a young lady, the one who had founded that chapter, the largest student anti-death penalty group in the country when she was 16. She was now 23. By merging a pro-life group on campus and an NAACP chapter into a single-issue coalition, we sent her to the last 3 states, South Dakota, Wyoming, and New Hampshire. And she won the battle in every single state without NAACP chapters, because they don't exist in any other states in the high schools, by substituting Amnesty International chapters and teaming up with pro-life groups. And the lesson we learned there was really taught to her and us by those students. You see, the lobbyists had said, so if you will, Joe Taker, she has this little light she lit when she was 16 when she decided she would abolish the juvenile death penalty before she died. And that light only showed her 2 steps, which is convince the local NAACP group and combine with the pro-life group. That's as far as they got in South Carolina. So she gets to South Dakota, takes those 2 steps, and the students say, okay, what do we do now? She said, well, this is as far as I've ever gotten. They said, well, what do the lobbyists say we should do? They said, lobbyists say, we shouldn't focus on these politicians because they're always against us, and we shouldn't focus on those because they're always with us. No, we need to focus on the ones in the middle and convert them to our cause. Students say, okay, how has that worked for the lobbyists? Well, they've lost 17 out of 17 states. Do they have everything they need? Oh, yeah, no, most of these were done by the wealthiest law firms in the country. So what you're saying is that strategy doesn't work. Yeah, I guess that strategy doesn't work. Okay, well, why don't we try a new one? Well, what's that, she says. Why don't we talk to every single member of the state legislature? Brilliant strategy, worked 3 states in a row. Turns out there is no old politician who didn't start out as some kind of young idealist. And when confronted by young idealists in their own party and the other party who are totally on the same page, they really would skip that debate if they possibly could. And so the opposition was instantly demotivated. Our side felt like the cavalry had arrived, that the wind was at their back, that the sun was in their face, and they were emboldened. And the folks in the middle, well, they're just like most people. They move towards light, just like squid. They move towards light. And seeing the light that was over here on our side, with all these young people so excited, conservative and liberal, agreeing, and on this side that was just sort of depressed, like, man, we got to argue with them. They moved to our side, and we won every state. Now, what do these lessons tell us about fighting mass incarceration? Stopping a prison in Mississippi a college from becoming a prison, and a prison from being erected altogether. How did we do that? We talked to everybody without any assumptions about the righteousness of our cause, and we converted more Mississippians than anybody thought was possible. We were literally co-opted the editorial department of newspapers that had supported segregation as recently as the early 1980s, late 1970s. That's the first lesson. Your cause is just and righteous. You don't assume. You simply approach people with a sense of optimism and clarity about your cause. And you give them the opportunity to join. The second one, taught to us by Joe Takeyidi, has turned out to be the transformative strategy of the American criminal justice reform movement, which is that you go to the activists on the left and you go to the activists on the right and you squeeze everybody in the middle. As president of the NAACP, I and the president of the Texas NAACP teamed up with Tea Party members, brought together by a Latina activist named Ana Yanes Correa and her brilliant organization, the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. And together, we convinced Governor Rick Perry to sign 50 out of 52 progressive criminal justice bills that we passed. Prior to that push, Texas had never shut down a prison in its history. They built new ones and they refurbished old ones. Because of that push, they are now on track to quickly shut down 11 prisons. Thank you. And that is the reason to be hopeful. And understand the consensus right now is fragile. There are points of disagreement. Those are pretty sturdy. The liberal activists oppose the death penalty. The Republican activists are for it. The liberal activists oppose private prisons. The Republican activists are for it. But literally, when there are 10 points on a paper, there's only 2 points of disagreement. There are 8 of agreement. And we would be fools to let the perfect get in the way of the good and let the 2 overshadow the 8. We'll knock out the 8, and then we can bicker about the other 2. And so Newt Gingrich calls it right on crime. In the civil rights community, we call it smart on crime. But 80% of it is identical. In fact, if you go online to the NAACP website, there is a report on that issue of prisons eating the lunch of public universities called Misplaced Priorities, and you will find also next to it a 2-page letter of endorsement, full-throated, from Newt Gingrich endorsing the entire thing. But the other part of it is that, and I want to get to the conversation we started in the beginning about the impact. The other part of it is that we have to recognize that every single young adult in America pays a price, and I mean a real price. I mean one you can measure either in debt or in earning potential squandered because of mass incarceration. And listen to me here. Again, we've already established we have the most incarcerated young people on the planet of any and every color. Black, brown, white, red, yellow, you name it. 1. So that means that in every community, there's a group of kids who are in prison who don't need to be in prison, because if they were in a different country, the things they were in prison for, they would not be imprisoned in the first place, like drug addiction. That's one group that's paying a price. Now, the other group is kind of invisible to us. It's college students. This generation of college students are the most indebted college students in the history of America. The ones most in fear that they have just simply gone to college to be duped into becoming indentured servants. They are also the ones most likely to default on their student loans, and in what probably the most perverse twist, the federal government intentionally profits off their student loans. If they are at a public university, it's clear. See, public universities or community colleges like this one typically don't have big endowments. I mean, your president can correct me if I'm wrong. You guys may have like a wonderful Harvard-like endowment. I don't think so. So what happens is when the state subsidy goes down, tuition goes up. Tuition goes up, student loans go up. Student loans go up, default goes up. All those things go up and dreams get crushed. But if you're at a private university, even if there is a big endowment, private universities generally informally peg what they charge for tuition to the public universities. They're comfortable always being sort of X percentage above the public universities. So when public university tuitions have an unprecedented spike, private universities, who may be motivated by other reasons, including greed, at the very least have a cover. They say, well, look what's happening at UC Berkeley. Look what's happening at the community college. Okay, now we have 2 groups of students. You say, well, what about the ones who aren't in prison and aren't in college? Well, those students, that group just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as young people decide, I just can't afford to go to college. Because they're most terrified about becoming the group after prison, the thing that most terrifying to them is maybe I'll start college, maybe I can't afford to finish, and then I'll have the debt and no degree. And I'll be working for nothing and yet paying the debt of somebody who should be working for a lot more because I invested in 3 years of school, but I couldn't afford the fourth. We love our children. All of these are all our children. We have to get back to a place in America where we are more motivated by our fear, more motivated by our love of our own children than our fear of somebody else's kids. And the only way I would offer to get there is to admit to ourselves that they are all our children, that we are all Americans. They are all American children, and therefore we must fight for all of them as if they are our very own. My pleading with you tonight may seem orthogonal, but I guarantee you it's spot on. Which is this week, not this month. It certainly don't take a year. If you don't know what you're fighting for, if you don't know what you're going to accomplish before you die, write everything that really ticks you off down on a sheet of paper. Cross off the things that are clearly less significant than other things. And if you can't figure out what to fight for, flip it over and write down those 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 12 things. And then draw a circle. And whatever is most in the middle of that circle, let that be it. Because the only thing better than waiting to figure out the perfect thing to change on this planet is to figure out something that's pretty good. Win it faster than the enemy thinks is possible. And get the chance to change it again. But the other thing that happens when you have something that you're fighting for is you understand the value of allies. Other people come to you. They may be environmentalists who show up to support you in fighting for voting rights. They may be the pro-life group that reads the doctrine of life and figures out, oh my gosh, we cannot be pro-life and be pro-death penalty, and shows up and helps you abolish the juvenile death penalty. And in seeing the value of allies, you decide yourself you have to become an ally as well. And that's when we get really powerful. People often have this wisdom, which is at the state capitol, Congress, please don't take on too many controversial issues in 1 year. After we get to this, after we get to that, next year we'll handle this, next year we'll handle that. 5 years from now, maybe you can hope, if everything holds together, we'll get to your issue. In Maryland, in 2012, after watching the country go through what it had gone through in 2011, when Tea Party swept into power and was attacking all of our rights at once, the progressives, we regained our bearings. And on our agenda was pass marriage equality, abolish the death penalty, pass the DREAM Act, pass sensible gun safety reform, and expand voting rights protections. And the old wise men, and it's usually men who come to rain in your parade, the old wise men came and said, please don't do that. We won't win anything. It's too much controversy to take on in one calendar year, one 12-month period, rather. Fall of 2012, spring of 2013. And we went back and we talked to some of the young activists about it, and the young activists just said, like, we don't want to hear that. So let's explain something to you. If we don't fight for the DREAM Act, we're going to lose these folks. And we don't fight for marriage equality, we're going to lose those folks. And if we don't fight to abolish the death penalty, we're going to lose the hardcore civil rights folks. So, Mr. Jealous, we'd advise you, we plead with you, please just go back to them and tell them that we have a different strategy. It's called the motto of the Three Musketeers. All for one, and one for all, because in a democracy, numbers matter. And when we all come together, they all add up right, and we win. And that year, we won marriage equality, and we abolished the death penalty, and we passed the DREAM Act, and we expanded voting rights. And yes, we even got pushed through gun safety reform. Please figure out what you're fighting for. Please join up with others and be good allies in this struggle. And please make sure that one of the struggles you are an ally to is the struggle to reform our nation's criminal justice codes as quickly as possible. It should be unacceptable that the governor of Georgia can reform his criminal justice code, but the governor of California won't. That the governor of Texas will reform his criminal justice code, but Delaware wants to move slow. This is America. We are the home of the free. We are the land of the free and the home of the brave. And in this land of the free and the home of the brave, we are literally destroying the dreams of all of our children by our addiction to fear. Let us be a nation of courage. Let us be a nation of freedom. Let us be a country that destroys this barrier like we destroyed segregation, like we destroyed slavery. Thank you, and God bless. So you literally have to do it as a cost-benefit analysis. I would like to say like sympathy or compassion is all it takes, but it's not the way it works. And your best allies will typically be the fiscal conservatives on the Republican side, who, when they see that $1 invested in educating an inmate behind bars saves us $5 in future incarceration costs, will invest. And then you can go to the students and say, again, the reason that tuition keeps going up is because cost of incarceration keeps going up. And one of the ways we can get it under control is we can begin to educate folks behind bars. There are other things. I mean, whether it's conservative or liberal prison ministries do a great job of kind of humanizing, getting people connected. Things like the Prison University Project that gets professors and students behind bars, helps people really understand the potential that's there. But given the crisis our states are in, just understanding the brass tacks, that in other words, educating prisoners is one of the fastest ways to cut prison costs. Cutting prison costs is one of the best ways to free up money for subsidizing public universities and lowering tuition. I think is proven to be the most effective argument in state capitals.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm never going to get used to hearing myself at the same time, but anyway. Earlier on, you talked about how, like I said, this keeps throwing me off. About, now
Take your time, brother, take your time.
Sorry.
No, it's all right, man. Just take your time.
About the fact that slavery is technically still legal if it's criminals who are properly sentenced and so forth. Given how there's an increasing number of companies that use prison labor on some level, how much of an impact do you feel that has as far as making it more difficult to actually end mass incarceration?
There are lots of perverse incentives, I have identified one of them. So private prison labor, the fact that you can use slave labor to manufacture almost anything in America if you cut a deal with the right warden or the right Department of Corrections, is one of them. I'd say even more pervasive are the kickbacks, the kickbacks that Mignon Clyburn of the Federal Communications Commission has targeted that happen on prison phone calls. So, when you're calling home from behind bars, the question is, are they charging you 60 cents per minute or $3.50 per minute? I'm an investor, a company, Capor Capital, in a company that's cut the cost of calling home from prison by about 90% by competing with these guys. But, and that's a whole other story, but the typical way that works, the reason it's so high, so like in a jail in Texas, you might pay $3.50 a minute. A call home from dad will cost you $35. A family that might be subsisting on $12,000 a year, whose students may not, whose children may not have enough food, have food insecurity, and may eat most of their meals at school, and therefore may be almost starving every weekend, that $35 matters a lot. The reason it's so high is that for most jails and most prisons and most departments of corrections, sir, the number one factor in who gets the contract to operate the jails and the prison is how much money they will kick back to the local system. Then what happens is that Western Union, and I'll name them by name because they're nefarious in this way, well, they say, well, most of these people, they don't have banking accounts. And so they're going to have to pay their bills in cash. And so we want the exclusive contract for them to pay their bill in cash with us. And for that, because your phone company is getting squeezed by the prison system that's insisting on kickbacks, we'll give you, the phone company, a kickback off our fee. And then they'll charge a huge percentage, half of which will go to the phone company, half of which comes to Western Union and gives them profits. Finally, the other sort of perverse incentive, if you will, for maintaining high incarceration rates are what private prisons are doing, where they cut deals with states guaranteeing them a percentage, if you will, a bed count percentage. That at least 90% of the beds will always be filled. At least 90% of the beds will always be filled. So we don't just have a military industrial complex that warps our foreign policy. We have a prison industrial complex that warps our domestic policy, and we all have to fight it. And you have to look, and that's why it's so important that Hillary Clinton has shifted her position. She started off her campaign accepting money from the private prison lobby. If you want to know why progressive activists were so upset, that's why they were so upset. Thank you. She no longer takes it, and we're very happy that she doesn't. Are there any other questions? Thank you, guys. It's been a real pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you very much. Oh, wait, we have one more question. Yep.
Sorry, Ben, I know you're trying to get out of here.
It's all right.
I'll be brief. So I loved at the end you talked about the Three Musketeers model.
Yeah.
One for all, for one, et cetera, et cetera. But I've also heard the argument against trying to find the intersectionality between the plights of blacks and the marriage equality group and all these different groups is that sometimes it diminishes the strength of your movement. I mean, I've heard people argue, for example, right here in Grand Rapids, I saw the Black Lives Matter chapter try to focus on Black trans lives matter, and people were outraged because they felt like, you know, the LGBT community may get equality, but that didn't make anything better for Black people.
No, that's right.
And so I always wonder, what is the argument for that when you feel like we should all work together to just make the world a general better place when we all are expecting different outcomes, different pieces of legislation, different results? And so
Sure.
I just wanted to know about
So
that.
again, what I was suggesting, if you will, is a connected mosaic, like a puzzle, where everybody has their distinct identity, their distinct agenda, and we play different roles. So on the death penalty in Maryland, the NAACP led. On marriage equality, we were number 2 behind the Human Rights Campaign. But the LGBT activists were so appreciative of us showing up that they shifted votes to support us on the death penalty. When you play different roles, then you avoid becoming a multi-issue coalition. Multi-issue coalitions can't exclude people. They agree with you on 4 things, but they disagree on 1 thing. And so they won't join the coalition at all. What we say is that you create an alliance of single-issue coalitions, where the expectation on any group, if you will, they're supporting at least one of the other groups, preferably more. And that's the math that adds up. I'll also just kind of close on this for a second, because I want to talk about sort of the urgency of this, and you touched on something for me, because, see, we in the Black Civil Rights Movement have a mandate that comes down to us from Frederick Douglass, but ultimately, Frederick Douglass was also, one of the definers of the modern Republican Party, one of the definers of the broader civil rights movement, of which the Black Civil Rights Movement is a part. And if you only read one speech this year by a 19th century orator, and you have to read them in the way Toni Morrison defines reading, which is you may have to go over one line multiple times before you understand its meaning. Read this speech. It is called Our Composite Nationality by Frederick Douglass. Our Composite Nationality from Frederick Douglass. In that speech, he says a lot of things, including the fact that we didn't come against, and I'm paraphrasing, because, man, you got to paraphrase kind of King James speakers in the 19th century. So we didn't come against a war to end slavery in the Southeast to let you enslave somebody in the Southwest. He was talking about the Chinese railroad workers. This speech was prompted by his opposition to the Chinese Exclusion Act. The most important thing that he says in that speech is he says, every nation has a unique destiny. And its destiny is based on its character. And its character is shaped by its geography. And its character is defined by that nation at its best, not its worst. Charitable words from a man who had been tortured as a slave. He said, and the destiny of America, excuse me. Then he went on to talk about our geography. He says, and its character is shaped by its geography, and our geography is unique. Our geography, well, we are bordered by friendly nations north and south, and we are connected by oceans east and west to the rest of the world. And therefore, our destiny, based on our character, defined by us at our best, and shaped by our very unique geography, and this part is a direct quote, is to be the most perfect example of the unity and dignity of the human family that the world has ever seen. That is a former slave in the 1870s, speaking to all of us about the need to link together and fight like hell, there I said it, and fight like hell to move our country forward. Thank you and God bless.
So we'll have a book signing